The letter trembled in Rebecca's frozen fingers as she stepped off the train into what should have been the dusty streets of Yuba City, California, but instead found herself facing a wall of white so thick she could barely see 3 feet ahead. November 1881 had brought an unprecedented blizzard to the Sacramento Valley, and Rebecca Bolton, fresh from Boston with nothing but a carpetbag and a promise of marriage to a man she had never met, realized with growing horror that no one was waiting for her at the station. The wind howled through the empty platform, cutting through her wool traveling dress like it was made of paper. She had expected California to be warm, had read about golden sunshine and endless summers, but the station master who hurried past her into the warmth of his office called over his shoulder that this was the worst storm in 20 years. Rebecca clutched her bag tighter, her teeth chattering so violently she bit her tongue. The taste of copper filled her mouth as she scanned the whiteout desperately for any sign of Cornelius Marsh, the merchant who had promised her a home, security, and respectability in exchange for her hand in marriage. But there was no one. The platform emptied within minutes as the few other passengers were collected by worried family members or disappeared into the storm toward whatever shelter they could find. Rebecca stood alone, watching her breath form clouds that were immediately torn away by the screaming wind. She had exactly $3.42 to her name, no family to return to in Boston, and nowhere to go. The alternative to this marriage had been the streets or worse, a reality she had fled 3 weeks ago with determination burning in her chest and hope, fragile as spun glass, cradled in her heart. The cold was becoming dangerous now. She could no longer feel her toes in her button-up boots, and her fingers had gone from painful to numb. Rebecca knew with the clarity that comes from desperation that she could not simply stand here and freeze to death. The station master had gone inside and shut the door firmly against the elements. She could see the warm glow of his lamp through the frosted window, but when she had knocked earlier, asking if he had seen Mr. Marsh, he had simply shaken his head and told her to wait outside, that he could not have strange women cluttering up his office. So Rebecca did the only thing she could do. She stepped off the platform and into the blizzard, heading in the direction the station master had vaguely gestured when she asked where the main street was. The snow was already ankle-deep and getting deeper by the minute. Each step was a battle against the wind that seemed determined to push her back, to knock her down, to bury her in this white wilderness so far from the home she had known. She had made it perhaps 2 blocks, though distance had lost all meaning in the whiteout, when her boot caught on something hidden beneath the snow. Rebecca fell hard, her hands plunging into the icy powder as her carpetbag flew open, spilling her few possessions into the storm. A scream of frustration and fear tore from her throat as she scrambled to gather her things, but the wind snatched her spare shirtwaist and sent it tumbling into the white void. Her fingers, clumsy with cold, managed to stuff her nightgown and the small bundle of letters back into the bag before she struggled to her feet. That was when she realized she had no idea which direction she had come from. The world was nothing but white in every direction, the wind howling like a living thing, and Rebecca felt terror, pure and primal, flood through her veins. She was going to die out here alone, and no one would even know to look for her. She would be just another frozen body found when the storm cleared, another sad story of a foolish woman who thought she could make a life in the West. "Help!" she tried to scream, but the wind threw the word back in her face. "Please, someone help me!" Her legs were giving out. She could not feel them anymore, could not feel much of anything except a creeping warmth that some dim part of her mind recognized as the beginning of the end. She had read once that freezing to death was peaceful, that eventually You just fell asleep." But Rebecca had never wanted to sleep less in her entire life. She wanted to live, wanted the chance to build something, to be something more than the orphaned daughter of a drunk who had died owing money to half of Boston. She fell again, and this time she was not sure she had the strength to rise. The snow was softer than she had expected, almost welcoming. Her eyes were drifting closed when she heard it, barely audible over the storm but definitely there. A voice, deep and rough, calling out, "Anyone there? Hello?" Rebecca tried to answer but managed only a weak croak. She forced her eyes open, squinting against the stinging snow, and saw a shape moving through the white. Tall, broad-shouldered, leading a horse that looked like a ghost in the storm. "Here," she managed, slightly louder. "I am here." The shape changed direction, moving toward her with sudden urgency. Then he was there, dropping to his knees beside her, and Rebecca found herself looking up into a face that was half hidden by a snow-crusted hat and bandana, but with eyes so intensely blue they seemed to cut through the storm itself. "Good Lord, what are you doing out here?" His voice was rough with cold and something that might have been anger, but his hands were gentle as they pulled her to her feet. "Can you stand? We need to get you inside now." "I was looking." Rebecca's words slurred together, her tongue thick and clumsy. "Looking for, supposed to meet." Explanations later. Survival first. He wrapped something around her, his coat, she realized dimly, still warm from his body. Then he was lifting her, and Rebecca wanted to protest that she could walk, that she was not some helpless child, but her body betrayed her, and she sagged against his chest like a rag doll. He settled her in front of him on his horse, keeping one arm locked around her waist while he gathered the reins. "Hold on," he said directly into her ear, and then they were moving through the storm, the horse picking its way with more confidence than Rebecca would have thought possible through the blinding white. She drifted, consciousness coming and going like a candle flame in a draft. She was aware of movement, of the solid warmth of the man behind her, of his arm holding her secure when she would have slipped sideways out of the saddle. Then there was a barn, dim and blessedly still, the howl of the wind suddenly muted. He was lifting her down, carrying her across a yard she could not see, and then there was a door, a rush of warmth so intense it was painful, and the crackling glow of a fireplace. "Stay with me now," the voice was saying, and Rebecca forced her eyes open to find herself on a rug in front of a roaring fire, the man kneeling beside her, pulling off her soaked boots with efficient movements. "We need to get you warm slowly. Too fast and it is dangerous." "My bag," Rebecca mumbled. "I lost my bag. I have it. I grabbed it." He nodded toward where her carpet bag sat by the door, dripping snow onto the floorboards. "What is your name?" "Rebecca." "Rebecca Bolton." Her teeth were chattering again, violent shudders racking her whole body now that she was out of the wind. "I came from Boston. I was supposed to. Mr. Marsh was supposed to. Cornelius Marsh." The man's hands paused in their work of chafing warmth back into her feet. "You are his mail-order bride." Rebecca managed a nod, humiliation washing through her even colder than the snow had been. "He was supposed to meet me at the station, but there was no one. I waited, but I was freezing, so I thought I could find, but I got lost." The man made a sound that might have been a curse, though he swallowed most of it. "Marsh left town 2 days ago, took the stage to Sacramento with his mistress, apparently decided a wife would complicate his arrangements." His voice was tight with anger. "Did he not even send you a telegram?" The room seemed to spin. "He left, but we had an arrangement. I came all this way. I gave up everything. Easy now." His hands were back, steady and warm, rubbing life back into her frozen fingers. "Breathe. You are safe here. We will sort the rest out once you are warm and dry." Rebecca wanted to argue, wanted to demand explanations and solutions, but her body had other ideas. The warmth of the fire and the relief of being alive and inside were combining into an overwhelming exhaustion. Her eyes kept trying to close despite her best efforts. "Go ahead and rest," the man said, his voice gentler now. "You are safe here, I promise you that. You will never have to walk alone in a storm like that again. I give you my word." It was the second promise a man had made her. But somehow this one, from a stranger whose face she had barely seen, felt more solid than any vow Cornelius Marsh had written in his neat, formal letters. Rebecca let her eyes close, let the darkness take her, and for the first time since she had stepped off the train into that nightmare of white, she felt something that might have been hope. When Rebecca woke, she was in a bed, buried under what felt like a mountain of quilts. The room was small but clean, with simple wooden furniture and cheerful yellow curtains that filtered weak afternoon light. The storm was still raging outside. She could hear the wind battering at the windows. For a moment, she could not remember where she was or how she had gotten here, and then it all came rushing back. The empty platform, the blizzard, falling in the snow, and those blue eyes cutting through the white. She sat up slowly, her body aching and stiff. She was wearing a flannel nightshirt that was several sizes too large for her, and her wet clothes were nowhere to be seen. Rebecca felt her face flush with embarrassment. The stranger must have undressed her, must have seen her in nothing but her undergarments. But then, he had also saved her life, so perhaps propriety could be overlooked under the circumstances. The door opened after a brief knock, and the man from the storm entered carrying a tray. In the light of the bedroom, Rebecca could finally see him clearly. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who made his living through physical labor. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and worn slightly longer than was fashionable. His face was tanned and weathered, with strong features that stopped just short of handsome, saved from severity by a surprisingly gentle mouth. And those eyes, even more striking in the lamplight, were the clear, startling blue of a mountain lake. "You are awake," he said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was trampled by a herd of cattle," Rebecca admitted, her voice coming out rough and scratchy. "But alive, thanks to you. I do not even know your name." "Quinton. Quinton Reeves." He set the tray on the table beside the bed. "And you do not need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same. But you are the one who did." Rebecca looked at the tray, which held a bowl of something that smelled rich and savory, fresh bread, and a cup of what might have been coffee or tea. Her stomach growled loudly, making her flush with embarrassment again. "Is that for me? Unless you think I climbed the stairs to eat in here by myself." There was a hint of humor in his voice now. "It is just venison stew, nothing fancy, but it will help get your strength back." Rebecca reached for the bowl, then hesitated, suddenly aware of how inappropriate this all was. She was in a strange man's home in his bed, wearing his nightshirt and completely unchaperoned. If anyone in Yuba City found out, her reputation would be destroyed before she even had a chance to establish one. "Mr. Reeves, I appreciate your kindness, truly, but I should not be here. This is not proper." Quinton pulled up a chair and sat down, his expression serious. "Miss Bolton, I understand your concern, but the storm is not letting up, and even if it were, you have nowhere to go. Marsh is gone, probably for good, and I am not going to put you back out in that blizzard in the name of propriety. So here is what we are going to do. You are going to stay here until the storm clears and you are fully recovered. Then we will figure out what your options are, and if anyone in town has a problem with it, they can take it up with me." There was steel in his voice, a quiet authority that made Rebecca believe he meant every word. She picked up the spoon and took a bite of the stew, and it was so delicious after days of nothing but the stale sandwiches she had purchased on the train that she nearly cried. "This is wonderful," she said quietly. "Thank you, truly." They sat in silence for a few minutes while she ate, the only sounds the clinking of her spoon against the bowl and the howling of the wind outside. Finally, Quinton spoke again. "If you do not mind me asking, what made you come all the way from Boston to marry a man you had never met?" Rebecca set down her spoon, debating how much to tell him. But he had saved her life and was offering her shelter. He deserved at least some honesty. "My father died 6 months ago. He was a drinker, a gambler, and when he passed, he left me with nothing but debts. I had been working as a seamstress, but it was not enough to cover what he owed. The men he borrowed from were not patient types, and they made it clear that there were other ways I could work off the debt if I could not pay in cash." Quinton's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. "I saw an advertisement in the paper," Rebecca continued. "Mail-order brides wanted for respectable men in California. It seemed like a way out, a chance to start over somewhere no one knew me or my father. Mr. Marsh's letters were kind, his situation seemed stable, and California was about as far from Boston as I could get. So I took the chance." "And he left you standing in a blizzard," Quinton said, anger simmering in his voice. "That man is not fit to shine your shoes." Rebecca felt an unexpected warmth bloom in her chest at his words. "Well, it does not matter now. He made his choice and I am left to deal with the consequences. I will need to find work, I suppose. Is there much call for seamstresses in Yuba City?" "Some," Quinton said slowly. "Though I will be honest with you, Miss Bolton. It is a rough town. There are good people here, but there are also plenty who would take advantage of a young woman alone with no protection and no family. You would need to be careful." "I have been careful my whole life," Rebecca said, a trace of bitterness creeping into her voice. "And where did it get me? Stuck in a strange town, dependent on the charity of strangers with $3 to my name and no prospects. Maybe it is time I stopped being careful and started being bold." Quinton looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in those blue eyes. "Bold can get you killed out here, Miss Bolton, especially for a woman." "Well, careful nearly got me killed today, so perhaps the odds are about the same either way." Rebecca drained her coffee cup and set it down with more force than necessary. "I apologize. You have been nothing but kind to me, and here I am being ungracious. The truth is I am frightened and angry, and I do not know what I am going to do, but that is not your problem." "Maybe I want to make it my problem," Quinton said quietly. When Rebecca looked at him in surprise, he stood up abruptly, taking the tray. "You should rest more. The storm probably will not clear until tomorrow at the earliest. We can talk about your options then." He was gone before Rebecca could respond, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the sound of the wind. She lay back down, pulling the quilts up to her chin, and stared at the ceiling. She had come to California to marry a man who did not want her, had nearly died in a freak blizzard, and was now dependent on the kindness of a cowboy, whose motives she did not fully understand. Her life had become something out of one of those lurid dime novels she used to read in secret back in Boston. But as she drifted back to sleep, it was not fear or anger that filled her thoughts. It was the memory of strong arms holding her safe, of a rough voice promising she would never walk alone again, and of blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. The storm raged for 2 more days. Rebecca spent most of the first day in bed, recovering from her ordeal, but by the second day she was feeling restless and guilty. Quinton had been nothing but kind, bringing her meals, checking on her regularly, and asking for nothing in return. The least she could do was make herself useful. She found her clothes cleaned and dried, folded neatly on the chair in her room. Someone, Quinton presumably, had even repaired a tear in her skirt that she had not noticed before. The stitching was rough but functional, and Rebecca found herself oddly touched by the gesture. Dressed and feeling more like herself, she ventured out of the bedroom and explored the house properly for the first time. It was a simple structure, just 4 rooms on the ground floor with the 2 bedrooms upstairs. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one, with the massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. Everything was clean but spare, the home of a man who lived alone and saw no need for unnecessary decoration. Quinton was not inside. Through the window, Rebecca could see him moving between the house and the barn, a dark figure battling through the snow to tend to his animals. She could not imagine how difficult it must be to care for livestock in this weather, how exhausting and cold and dangerous. And he was doing it all while also taking care of her, an unexpected burden that had literally fallen into his lap. Rebecca set about making herself useful. She found flour, salt, and lard in the pantry and set to making biscuits. There were dried beans soaking in a pot, so she built up the fire and started them cooking with some salt pork she found hanging in the cold pantry. It felt good to be doing something, to be contributing rather than simply taking. She was pulling the biscuits from the oven when the door opened and Quinton stamped inside, covered in snow and looking half frozen. He stopped short when he saw her, surprise clear on his face. "You should be resting," he said, but there was no reproach in his voice. "I have been resting for a day and a half. Any more and I would go mad from boredom." Rebecca set the biscuits on the table and gestured to the pot bubbling over the fire. "I made dinner. It is the least I could do to repay your hospitality." Quinton shrugged out of his heavy coat and hung it by the door, then crossed to the fire, holding his hands out to the warmth. "You do not owe me anything, Miss Bolton. Please call me Rebecca. After you have saved my life and seen me in my undergarments, I think we can dispense with formality." She blushed as soon as the words left her mouth, horrified at her own boldness. "I apologize. That was inappropriate." To her surprise, Quinton laughed, a rich, warm sound that transformed his usually serious face. "It was honest. And you are right, formality seems a bit silly at this point. Though for the record, I was very respectful about the undergarment situation, kept my eyes closed the whole time." Rebecca could not help but laugh as well, tension she had not realized she was carrying draining away. "I appreciate that, and you can call me Rebecca." "Rebecca, then." "And you should call me Quinton or Quinn. Most people do." He washed his hands in the basin by the sink and then sat down at the table, looking at the biscuits and the pot of beans with genuine appreciation. "This looks wonderful. I have to admit, my cooking tends toward the functional rather than the delicious." They ate together, and Rebecca was surprised by how comfortable it felt, how easy the conversation was. Quinton told her about his ranch, a modest operation he had built from nothing over the past 5 years. He ran cattle mostly, with a few horses, and did well enough to live comfortably, though he was by no means rich. He had come to California from Missouri after the war, looking for a fresh start and open land. "What about family?" Rebecca asked. "Do you have any back in Missouri?" Quinton's expression darkened slightly. "My parents died when I was young. Cholera. I was raised by my uncle, and he was not what you would call a kind man. I left as soon as I was old enough to enlist and never looked back. The army was not much better, truth be told, but at least I was paid and fed. After the war, I just wanted to be somewhere new, somewhere I could build something that was mine." There was a loneliness in his words that resonated with Rebecca's own experience. "I understand that. The wanting to start over, I mean, though I suppose I made a mess of it." You did not make a mess of anything, Quinton said firmly. Marsh is the one who made a mess. You did what you had to do to survive, and there is no shame in that. Easy for you to say. You are not the one stranded in a strange town with no money and no prospects. Rebecca pushed beans around her plate, her appetite suddenly gone. I have been trying not to think about it too much, but I need to face reality. Once this storm clears, I need to figure out what I am going to do. Quinton was quiet for a moment, seeming to struggle with something. Finally, he set down his fork and looked directly at her. I have an idea. It might sound crazy and you can absolutely say no, but hear me out. Rebecca's heart started beating faster, though she could not have said why. All right, marry me instead. The room seemed to spin. Rebecca stared at him, certain she had misheard. What? Marry me, Quinton repeated, his voice calm and steady. You came here to be someone's wife, to have security and a home. I can offer you that. I have a good ranch, a solid house, and I promise you would be safe and cared for. We barely know each other, I know, but you did not know Marsh either. At least with me, you know I will not leave you standing in a blizzard. Quinton, that is insane, Rebecca said, but her mind was racing. Was it really any more insane than traveling across the country to marry Cornelius Marsh? At least Quinton was kind, had proven himself to be honorable and protective. And there was something about him, something that made her feel safe in a way she never had before. We have known each other for 2 days. I know, Quinton said. And I am not saying it would be a real marriage, not right away. We could have separate rooms, take time to get to know each other properly. But it would give you security, respectability, and protection. And honestly, it would benefit me too. People in town have been after me to settle down for years. Having a wife would stop the matchmaking attempts. Rebecca wanted to say no, wanted to tell him he was being ridiculous, but the alternative was terrifying. Finding work in a rough mining town as a single woman with no connections, constantly fighting off unwanted advances, living hand to mouth with no security. Or she could accept Quinton's offer, marry a man who had already shown her more kindness than anyone in her life had in years, and have a chance at building the life she had dreamed of when she left Boston. Can I think about it? She asked finally. This is a big decision. Of course, Quinton said. Take all the time you need. The offer stands no matter what you decide. That night, Rebecca lay awake in the darkness, listening to the wind howl and thinking about impossible choices. She thought about Quinton's offer, about the way he had looked at her across the dinner table, earnest and hopeful and trying not to show it. She thought about the feeling of his arms around her in the storm, the certainty that she was safe. She thought about starting over, about taking a leap of faith, not because she was desperate, though she was, but because maybe, just maybe, this was the fresh start she had been looking for all along. By morning, she had made her decision. The storm broke on the 3rd day, leaving Yuba City buried under nearly 3 feet of snow. The world outside was transformed, sparkling and white and achingly beautiful. Rebecca stood at the kitchen window, watching the sunrise paint the snow in shades of pink and gold, and felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe, or resignation, or hope. Perhaps all three. Quinton came downstairs and found her there, already dressed and with coffee brewing on the stove. Morning, he said, his voice still rough with sleep. Storm finally passed. I noticed, Rebecca said, not turning from the window. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. I have been thinking about your offer. She felt rather than saw him go still behind her. And Rebecca turned to face him, squared her shoulders, and met his blue eyes directly. Yes, I will marry you. The relief and joy that flashed across Quinton's face was unmistakable, though he tried to hide it behind his usual stoic expression. You are sure? I do not want you to feel pressured. I am sure, Rebecca said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. "You are right that I do not know you well yet, but I know you are kind and honorable and you saved my life. That is more than I knew about Cornelius Marsh, and I was willing to marry him. At least with you, I have seen proof of your character. And if you are willing to give me time to let this be a marriage in name only until we know each other better, then yes, I accept your proposal." Quinton crossed the room in 2 long strides and took her hands in his. "I promise you will not regret this. I will do everything in my power to make you happy, Rebecca. You have my word." "I know," Rebecca said softly, and was surprised to find that she meant it. "So when do we do this? Do we need to wait for some kind of official process?" "The preacher lives in town, Reverend Matthews. As soon as the roads are passable, we can go see him. With this much snow, it might be a few days before we can get to town easily." Quinton was still holding her hands, his grip warm and firm. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Rebecca admitted with a shaky laugh. "But in a good way, I think. Or at least in a way that feels better than any of my other options." "That is not exactly a ringing endorsement," Quinton said, but he was smiling. "But I will take it. And Rebecca, thank you for trusting me, for taking this chance. I know it cannot be easy." "Thank you for offering," Rebecca said, "for wanting to help me when you had no obligation to do so." They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, and Rebecca felt the magnitude of what she had just agreed to settle over her like a blanket. She was going to marry this man, this near stranger who had pulled her from a blizzard and offered her a life. It was insane and impulsive, and nothing like the carefully planned future she had always imagined for herself. It was also, she realized with a start, the most right thing she had felt in a very long time. The next few days passed in a strange sort of domesticity. The snow was too deep for them to make it to town, so they were stuck on the ranch together, learning to navigate around each other in the small space. Rebecca continued to cook and clean, feeling like she needed to prove she would be useful as a wife. Quinton worked on repairing tack and equipment in the barn, checking on his cattle and chopping an endless supply of firewood. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked, learning about each other in the way couples usually did before they got married rather than after agreeing to wed. Rebecca told him about growing up in Boston, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about her father's slow decline into drink and debt. She told him about her love of reading, her skill with a needle, her secret dream of someday having a garden full of roses. Quinton told her about Missouri before the war, about learning to ride and rope from his uncle despite the man's harsh methods. He told her about his years in the Army, though she could tell there were parts he left out, memories too painful to share. He told her about coming to California, about the back-breaking work of building his ranch from nothing, about the satisfaction of owning land that was truly his. "You ever get lonely out here?" Rebecca asked one evening as they sat together on the old sofa, the firelight dancing across their faces. Quinton considered the question. "Sometimes. I am used to my own company and I like the peace of it, most days. But there are times when it would be nice to have someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone to share things with." He glanced at her, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. "What about you? Do you think you will get lonely? It is pretty isolated out here." "I think I will like it," Rebecca said honestly. "I have spent my whole life in a city, surrounded by people, and I was lonelier there than I have been in the past few days here with just you. There is a difference between being alone and being lonely, I think." "That is a wise observation," Quinton said. "And for what it is worth, I am glad you are here. Even with the circumstances being what they are, I find myself enjoying your company." Rebecca felt a warm glow in her chest at his words. "I enjoy your company too. You are easy to talk to, Quinton." I feel like I can be myself around you, which is not something I have experienced much in my life." "Then we are both lucky," Quinton said softly. He reached over and took her hand, a gesture that was becoming comfortably familiar. "I know this is not a conventional courtship, Rebecca, but I want you to know that I take our agreement seriously. I meant what I said about not rushing you, about letting things develop naturally between us." "I appreciate that," Rebecca said, even as part of her wondered what might happen if things did develop between them. She was increasingly aware of Quinton as a man, of his physical presence, his quiet strength, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She found herself noticing little things, the way he hummed tunelessly while he worked, how he always made sure she had the warmest seat by the fire, the gentleness of his hands despite their size and calluses. It would be easy, she thought, to fall for this man. Dangerously easy. And that scared her almost as much as the blizzard had. 5 days after the storm cleared, the roads were finally passable enough for them to ride into town. Quinton saddled up his horse, a big bay gelding named Scout, and helped Rebecca up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his coat, and tried not to think too hard about how right it felt. Yuba City was a typical California boomtown, a ramshackle collection of buildings that had sprung up to serve the miners and ranchers of the area. The main street was a muddy mess of melting snow and churned-up dirt, lined with saloons, a general store, a bank, and a hotel that had seen better days. People were out and about despite the cold, and more than a few turned to stare as Quinton rode through with Rebecca clinging to his back. "Is there always this much attention?" Rebecca whispered. "Small town," Quinton said. "Everyone knows everyone's business, and a strange woman is going to cause talk. Let them look. They will find out soon enough anyway." He stopped in front of a small white church at the end of the street, helping Rebecca down before tying Scout to the hitching post. "Ready?" he asked. Rebecca smoothed down her skirts, wishing she had something better to wear for her wedding day than a borrowed dress that was slightly too large and travel-worn boots. But there was nothing to be done about it now. "Ready," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Reverend Matthews was a kind-faced man in his 60s with thinning gray hair and shrewd brown eyes that seemed to see right through to Rebecca's soul. He listened to their request with a thoughtful expression, then leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Quinton Reeves, you have been a member of this community for 5 years, and in that time, I have never known you to be anything but honest and hardworking. So when you come to me with a young woman I have never seen before and ask me to marry you, I have to wonder what the story is." "It is complicated," Quinton started, but Rebecca interrupted. "I was supposed to marry Cornelius Marsh," she said, lifting her chin. "I came from Boston as his mail-order bride. When I arrived, he was not there. He had left town with another woman, leaving me stranded. I nearly died in the blizzard trying to find help. Quinton saved my life and has been kind enough to offer me an alternative arrangement. I know it is not conventional, Reverend, but I assure you we are both entering into this marriage of our own free will." The Reverend's eyes softened. "Cornelius Marsh is a fool, then. And while I appreciate your honesty, young lady, I have to ask, are you certain about this? Marriage is a sacred covenant, not a convenience." "I am certain," Rebecca said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "Quinton has shown me more kindness and respect in a few days than most people have in my entire life. I believe we can build a good life together." "And you, Quinton?" the Reverend asked. "You are sure about this?" "I am," Quinton said firmly. "I would not have asked if I was not." Reverend Matthews studied them both for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, I will marry you, but I want you both to understand what you are committing to. Marriage is not just a legal arrangement or a social convenience. It is a partnership, a union of two souls before God. It requires patience, forgiveness, communication, and love. Are you prepared for that? Yes, Rebecca and Quinton said together. Then let us proceed, the Reverend said, standing up. We will need witnesses. Let me fetch my wife and the church secretary. 20 minutes later, Rebecca found herself standing in front of the altar, her hand clasped in Quinton's, repeating vows that would bind her to this man for the rest of her life. It was nothing like the wedding she had once dreamed of as a girl. There were no flowers or music, no fancy dress or celebration. Just her and Quinton, two witnesses, and a preacher in a small frontier church. But when Quinton slipped a simple gold band onto her finger and said, "I, Quinton Reeves, take you, Rebecca Bolton, to be my lawfully wedded wife," his voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving hers. And when Rebecca repeated her own vows, promising to love and honor this man she barely knew, she felt something shift inside her. This was real. She was married. She was Mrs. Quinton Reeves, and whatever happened next, she was not alone anymore. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Matthews said with a smile. Quinton looked at Rebecca, a question in his eyes, and she gave a tiny nod. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a brief, chaste kiss that nevertheless sent warmth flooding through her entire body. When he pulled back, his cheeks were slightly flushed, and Rebecca knew hers must be bright red. "Congratulations," the Reverend said, shaking both their hands. "I hope you will be very happy together." They signed the marriage certificate, thanked the Reverend and his witnesses, and stepped back out into the cold afternoon. Rebecca looked down at the ring on her finger, still not quite believing what had just happened. She was married. She had a husband, a home, a future. "How do you feel?" Quinton asked as he helped her back onto Scout. "Strange," Rebecca admitted. "But not bad strange, just different. It has been a very eventful week." "That is putting it mildly," Quinton said with a laugh. He swung up into the saddle in front of her and turned Scout back toward the ranch. "We should stop at the general store on the way out of town. You need some things, proper clothes and supplies. Consider it a wedding present." "Quinton, you do not have to do that," Rebecca protested, but he waved her off. "You are my wife now. It is my job to provide for you. Besides, you cannot keep wearing my old nightshirt forever." At the general store, Rebecca was overwhelmed by the selection. She had grown used to making do with so little that having access to fabric and thread and ribbons felt like being in a palace. Quinton encouraged her to get whatever she wanted, and she tried to be practical, choosing sturdy calico for everyday dresses, good wool for something warmer, needles and thread, a hairbrush, and a few other necessities. The proprietor, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Chen, looked between them with open curiosity. "I heard Quinton Reeves was in town with a strange woman. I did not know you were courting anyone, Quinton." "We just got married," Quinton said calmly, pulling out his wallet to pay for Rebecca's purchases. "Rebecca, this is Mrs. Chen. She runs the best store in Yuba City. Mrs. Chen, my wife, Rebecca." The use of the word wife sent a little thrill through Rebecca, though she tried not to show it. Mrs. Chen's eyebrows shot up, but to her credit, she recovered quickly and gave Rebecca a warm smile. "Well, congratulations. It is nice to meet you, Mrs. Reeves. Welcome to Yuba City." "Thank you," Rebecca said, returning the smile. "It is nice to meet you as well." By the time they left the store, Rebecca could see curtains twitching in windows up and down the street. By tomorrow, the whole town would know that Quinton Reeves had gotten married to the mysterious woman who had come to town to marry Cornelius Marsh. She could only imagine what people would say, what assumptions they would make. But as they rode back to the ranch, the packages tied securely behind the saddle, Rebecca found she did not care as much as she thought she would. Let people talk. She had a husband who treated her with respect, a home that was safe and warm, and a future that was full of possibility. That was more than she had dared to hope for when she stepped off the train into that blizzard. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. They were learning to live together, to share space and routines, to be a team. Rebecca threw herself into making the house a home, sewing curtains for the windows, making a quilt for their bed, though she still slept in the guest room, baking bread and pies and stews. Quinton continued his work on the ranch, but now he came in for lunch instead of eating cold beans out in the barn, and in the evenings they sat together and talked or read, or simply enjoyed the comfortable silence. There were awkward moments, of course. The first time Rebecca accidentally walked in on Quinton washing up without a shirt. She had frozen in the doorway, unable to look away from the broad expanse of his chest and shoulders, the play of muscles under tanned skin. He had grabbed his shirt and turned away, both of them stammering apologies, and they had avoided each other for the rest of the day. But there were also moments of unexpected sweetness. The morning Quinton brought her coffee in bed as a surprise. The evening Rebecca mended his favorite shirt, the one he thought was beyond saving, and he looked at her like she had worked a miracle. The day he came in from the barn with a tiny kitten he had found huddled in the hay, half frozen, and together they nursed it back to health. Slowly, the walls between them began to come down. They stopped being strangers playing at being married and started becoming partners, friends, maybe even something more. One evening in early December, nearly a month after their wedding, Rebecca was sitting by the fire working on a new shirt for Quinton when she felt his eyes on her. She looked up to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "What is it?" she asked. "I was just thinking," Quinton said slowly, "about how much has changed in a month, how different my life is now." "Better or worse?" Rebecca asked, trying to keep her voice light even though her heart was suddenly pounding. "Better," Quinton said without hesitation. "So much better. I did not realize how empty this place was until you filled it. I did not realize how lonely I was until I did not have to be anymore." Rebecca set down her sewing, her hands trembling slightly. "I feel the same way. I thought I was coming to California for security, for a practical arrangement. But this, with you, it is more than that. You have given me a home, Quinton, a real home, and I am grateful for that." "I do not want your gratitude," Quinton said, and there was an intensity in his voice that made her breath catch. "I want, Rebecca, I know we agreed to take this slowly, to let things develop naturally. But I need you to know that this is not just a practical arrangement for me anymore. I care about you. More than I should, probably, given how little time we have known each other, but I cannot help it." Rebecca's heart was racing now. "You care about me." "I do," Quinton said. He stood up and crossed to where she sat, kneeling down so they were eye to eye. "I care about you very much. And if you need more time, if you want to keep things as they are, I will respect that. But if there is any chance that you might feel the same way, I want you to know that I am here. I am not going anywhere, and I will wait as long as you need." Rebecca looked into his blue eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and hope, and something that might have been love. She thought about the past month, about all the little moments that had built up between them. The way he always made sure she had the best piece of meat at dinner. The way she found herself listening for his footsteps, looking forward to the moment he walked through the door. The way her heart jumped every time their hands accidentally touched. She was falling for him. Maybe had already fallen. "Quinton," she said softly, reaching up to touch his face. "I do not need more time. I feel the same way. I have been trying not to, trying to be practical and sensible, but I cannot help it either. You are kind and good and honorable, and you make me feel safe and valued in a way I never have before. I care about you too, so much." The joy that lit up his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Really, really," Rebecca confirmed, laughing through the sudden tears in her eyes. "I know we agreed this would be a marriage of convenience, but I do not want that anymore. I want this to be real, Quinton. I want us to be real." "We are real," Quinton said, taking her hands in his. "We have been real since the moment I found you in that storm. I think I started falling for you when you woke up in my house, and the first thing you worried about was propriety, even though you had almost died. You were so brave and stubborn and determined to do the right thing, even when the world had not done right by you. And I started falling for you when you promised I would never walk alone again," Rebecca whispered. "You kept your promise, Quinton. You have been beside me every step of the way." "And I always will be," Quinton said. Then he leaned forward and kissed her, and this time it was not chaste or brief. It was deep and passionate and full of all the longing they had both been holding back. Rebecca melted into it, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, her fingers threading through his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinton rested his forehead against hers. "Move into my room," he said. "Be my wife in truth, not just in name, please." "Yes," Rebecca said without hesitation. "Yes, I want that too." That night, Rebecca moved her things into the master bedroom, and they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both shaken. Afterward, lying in Quinton's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Rebecca felt a happiness so complete it was almost frightening. "I love you," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I know it is too soon. I know I should not feel this way yet, but I do. I love you, Quinton." His arms tightened around her. "It is not too soon. And I love you too, Rebecca. I think I have loved you since I pulled you out of that blizzard and you looked at me like I was your salvation. I want to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that look." "You already are," Rebecca said, tilting her head up to kiss him again. "You already are." Winter gave way to spring, and Rebecca bloomed along with the landscape. She was happier than she had ever been, secure in Quinton's love and in the life they were building together. She planted her rose garden, learning from trial and error and advice from Mrs. Chen, who turned out to be a font of knowledge about gardening in California soil. She made friends with some of the other ranch wives in the area, women who welcomed her into their community with open arms once they saw how happy she and Quinton were together. Quinton was thriving too. He had always been a hard worker, but now there was a lightness to him that had not been there before. He smiled more, laughed more, seemed more at ease in his own skin. He frequently brought Rebecca little gifts, wildflowers he found while riding the range, a pretty rock from the creek, once an entire wagon load of lumber so she could build the chicken coop she had been wanting. "You do not have to keep bringing me things," Rebecca said, laughing, the day he presented her with a ridiculous hat he had won in a card game in town. "I am already your wife. You do not need to court me anymore." "I will court you for the rest of our lives," Quinton said, pulling her into his arms. "I never want you to doubt how much you mean to me." "I could never doubt that," Rebecca said, kissing him. "You show me every day." In May, Rebecca realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure before she told Quinton, afraid to get his hopes up only to be disappointed. But when the second month passed with no sign of her cycle, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant. She told him one evening after dinner, unable to keep the secret any longer. "Quinton, I need to tell you something. I am fairly certain that I am with child." The plate he had been drying slipped from his hands and clattered into the sink. He spun to face her, his eyes wide. "You are sure?" as sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. But all the signs are there. I am 2 months late, and I have been feeling queasy in the mornings, and my clothes are getting tight around the middle." Quinton crossed the room in 2 strides and swept her up into his arms, spinning her around with a whoop of joy. "We are going to have a baby. Rebecca, we are going to have a baby," Rebecca laughed, giddy with relief that he was happy about it. "Put me down, you lunatic. You will make me dizzy." He set her down carefully, his hands immediately going to her still flat belly. When will the baby come? If my calculations are right, sometime in late January or early February, right around the anniversary of when we met." "That seems fitting," Quinton said, his voice full of wonder. He dropped to his knees and pressed a kiss to her stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Rebecca ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had come into her life like a miracle and turned everything around. "You are going to be a wonderful father." "I am going to try," Quinton said, looking up at her with shining eyes. "I am going to try so hard, Rebecca. This child is going to know nothing but love and safety, I promise you that." "I know," Rebecca said. "I have never doubted it for a second." The pregnancy was not easy. Rebecca suffered from terrible morning sickness that lasted well into her 4th month, and as she grew larger, the California summer heat made her miserable. But Quinton was endlessly patient, bringing her cool water, fanning her when she could not sleep, rubbing her swollen feet at the end of the day. He insisted on taking over all the heavy chores, would not let her lift anything heavier than a basket of laundry, and generally treated her like she was made of glass. "I am pregnant, not broken," Rebecca said one day in August when he tried to stop her from picking vegetables in her garden. "I know," Quinton said, but he looked so worried that Rebecca could not be mad at him. "I just want to take care of you. You do take care of me every day, but I need to keep moving, Quinton. I will."